The winter air in the Ardennes bit like a blade, sharp enough to silence even the bravest men. And somewhere in that frozen stillness, a German officer stood beneath the pale December sky, turning a small brown box over in his hands. It was nothing more than an American K-ration waterproof cardboard, hardly larger than a book. But when he peeled it open and saw real ham chocolate coffee and cigarettes packed neatly, inside something heavy settled in his chest. This was not just food. This was the weight of an entire industrial empire, delivered to every American soldier every single day. Outside engines coughed in the cold. Kampfgruppe Peiper was still pushing west in what Germany hoped would become the turning point of the Ardennes offensive. Bridges to seize, fuel to capture, time running out. Yet inside the ration box lay a different truth.
Victory relied
One measure,
not just
not in
on
courage or
courage,
tactics, but in factory
but on the
supply lines and the
grind
nation's
of the
capacity
supply
to wage
chain.
modern war. So the question hangs over this battlefield like the winter fog. When German officers opened those American rations, what did they really understand about the Battle of the Bulge and about the war they were already losing? The final winter of 1944 arrived with a quiet that felt a deceptive pause in the larger struggle that had already consumed Europe.
Wenn wir
Beneath
hier
that
durch die
silence,
Ardennen
Germany
stoßen,
prepared
erreichen wir
one
der
last
Mars in
gamble,
2 Tagen.
an assault through the Ardennes
Das
that
ist
would
Befehl.
later be
Kein
remembered
Zurück mehr.
as the Battle of the Bulge. On maps in
Wir
Berlin,
müssen
the
die
plan
Mars
carried a strange mix of
überqueren und
desperation and ambition.
Antwerpen einnehmen,
Break through
bevor
thin
die
American lines,
Amerikaner
cross the
ihre
News
Linien
River, seize
schließen
Antwerp,
können.
and fracture the Allied coalition before it could fully close in. Officially, it was named the Ardennes Offensive.
officially named
Unofficially,
Operation
it was a
Walk
bid
them
to
Rhine.
rewrite a war
Was
already
understood by the
slipping
High
beyond
Command as a
Germany's
final,
control.
desperate
Among the units chosen to spearhead this thrust was Kampfgruppe Peiper, led by SS officer Joachim Peiper, whose column combined armor infantry engineers and reconnaissance into a fast-moving strike force. In theory, this formation represented the very edge of German tactical competence. 800 men, more than 100 tanks, and assault guns, veterans hardened on the Eastern Front. If any group could break the stalemate, it was this one. But even before Kampfgruppe Peiper crossed the starting line, the seeds of fame had been planted in its fuel tanks. Germany
can't move the armor another
allocated
kilometer,
barely
please.
5 million gallons
5
for the
million gallons
entire
won't get us
Ardennes
to the river, sir.
offensive. The numbers made no
Projected
sense.
consumption rate
Any
is double what's
officer
allocated here.
with a
won't last a
slide
week.
rule
Get me
could
command.
see that. German planners
Treibstofflager sind
assumed that
entscheidend.
American fuel
Die
depots would be
Amerikaner
captured
werden sich
intact,
zu schnell
that the
zurückziehen,
enemy
sie zu
would retreat
zerstören.
too quickly
Wir müssen sie
to destroy
intakt
their own
erobern.
supplies. It
Relies
was a
entirely on the
logistic
weather
theory,
wishful thinking,
held
perhaps.
together more by hope than
Men are exhausted,
mathematics.
Captain.
Still, on the first day, fortune seemed to favor Peiper. At the town of Bullingen, his men captured an American fuel depot containing 50,000 gallons, enough to keep the column moving, enough to convince
Sichern Sie
Peiper
es
that the plan
sofort.
might still be viable. American prisoners, shivering under guard, were ordered to pump their own fuel into the German tanks. Efficiency was the excuse. Humiliation was the second purpose. But beneath both lay an unspoken truth. German logistics had reached the point where even pride had become a luxury. As Peiper walked through the captured American depot, he noticed something else. Rows of neatly stacked crates labeled and sorted with the sort of precision only a vast supply system could maintain. One small box in particular caught his attention, a brown waterproof package stamped K-ration. He opened it and found a meal that required no kitchen, no pot, no fire, just calories, ready for the front line. Meat biscuits, chocolate coffee, sugar, gum, cigarettes, even toilet paper. A soldier did not need to stop or gather fuel to eat. He simply opened the box. This was the first quiet
shot
hint
showing the
of the American
K-ration as
military
the first
logistics
quiet sign of a
machine,
vast
a system whose
logistics
strength
machine that
would
would
weigh heavily
influence
over every hour
of the Battle of the Bulge.
While German soldiers relied on filled kitchens that rarely arrived, American troops carried their warmth and calories in their packs. While German units were already rationing
While the
bread,
Wehrmacht scraped
American
by on meager
factories
bread
were
rations on the
producing
Eastern
millions
Front,
of these meals
America's
every week.
industrial machine.
In that small box wrapped in waxed cardboard lay the quiet beginning of a larger truth. The very thing Germany lacked, industrial power, was what America could afford to give away in every direction. The deeper Kampfgruppe Peiper moved into the Ardennes, the more the landscape itself seemed to resist. What looked manageable on an operations map became painfully real on the frozen roads. Mud churned by retreating convoys, burned out vehicles, blocking narrow lanes, and civilian refugees moving in the same direction Peiper needed to advance. Every hour of daylight shortened the window for surprise. Every mile burned through fuel the Germans did not have. Yet, in the early afternoon of December 18th, momentum still favored the attackers. The column pushed towards Stavelot, a town divided by the Amblève River, a critical crossing for the Ardennes offensive. Peiper expected a quick fight. What he found instead was a determined American defense anti-tank guns dug in and a stone bridge that had been wired for demolition. For 3 hours, tanks and infantry clashed in streets dusted white with frost. At last, the Americans were forced back. Engineers rushed forward, checking the explosives. For reasons no one could agree on, faulty detonators, rushed placement, or sheer luck, the charges never went off. The bridge remained intact, but the victory brought no relief. Peiper needed fuel, not just territory. Intelligence reports had pointed to a major American depot near Stavelot, larger than the one at Büllingen, possibly enough to sustain his entire group to the Meuse River. German reconnaissance teams fanned out, searching barns, alleys, warehouses. They followed roads north and west, expecting to find storage tanks, trucks, or a fenced installation. They found nothing. What Peiper did not know, what no one in his column realized, was that he passed within 300 yards of the very depot he needed. More than 3 million gallons of American gasoline lay stacked in jerrycans along a roadside stretching for nearly 5 miles. No buildings, no pumps, no guards, just fuel arranged for rapid distribution. A hallmark of American military logistics that contrasted sharply with German expectations. Peiper was looking for a depot built like a German depot, not a logistical solution designed for speed. This single misunderstanding altered the course of the Battle of the Bulge. A tanker officer later recalled how strange it felt to roll past jerry cans scattered along the countryside, assuming they were leftovers, rather than the heart of a supply system. But the Americans had mastered a truth Germany had forgotten. Simplicity is its own kind of power. As the column rolled west, fuel gauges dipped toward empty. Tanks that once symbolized shock and momentum now crawled forward like metal beasts, losing their strength. What remained of German confidence began to erode. Officers who had marveled at K-rations only a day before now watched their own supplies dwindle to crumbs. Moments like these revealed the quiet architecture of war, the way battles hinge not on courage alone, but on unseen chains of supply. In the forests around Stavelot, the contrast between American abundance and German logistics failure grew sharper with every stalled engine. And as Peiper drove deeper into the Ardennes, victory slipped further from reach, not because of tactics, but because of the empty space inside German fuel tanks. By the time Kampfgruppe Peiper pushed into the outskirts of Stoumont, the winter sun was already slipping behind the pines. The momentum that had once carried the German spearhead now felt brittle fragile, as if each passing hour threatened to break it. Tanks that had roared across the opening days of the Ardennes offensive were slowing their engines, coughing in the cold, their fuel gauges sinking dangerously toward empty. The advance was no longer a thrust, it was a struggle to remain alive. American resistance grew sharper. Roadblocks appeared in every village. Anti-tank guns waited around narrow bends. And while German units clawed for every yard, the Americans were receiving ammunition, food, and reinforcements through a supply network that simply did not crack. Even surrounded units were resupplied by air, one of the many quiet ways American military logistics shaped the Battle of the Bulge. For Peiper, the contrast became harder to ignore. Inside Stowmont, the situation deteriorated quickly. Fog, cold, and exhausted infantry turned the town into a maze of stalled vehicles and defensive fire. Major Hal McCown of the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, later captured and held within Peiper's shrinking perimeter, remembered the German position not as a fortress, but as a hollow shell tanks low on fuel, men unable to cook medical stations nearly bare. He watched wounded Germans endure amputations without morphine bandages reused until they resembled rags. They were fighting like professionals, he later wrote, but living like a collapsing army. Then came the final blow. On December 22nd, 6 Luftwaffe aircraft attempted to resupply Peiper by airdropping canisters meant for the encircled column. But wind, enemy fire, and poor coordination sent most of the supplies drifting into American lines. German soldiers watched from the snow as parachutes landed just beyond reach, close enough to see too far to claim. Whatever hope remained evaporated with those falling canisters. Fuel ran out first, then ammunition, then food. The same men who had opened K-rations with quiet astonishment days earlier now survived on scraps. On December 23rd, Peiper gathered his remaining officers. The choice was stark. They could hold their ground and be annihilated. They could try to break through with vehicles that no longer moved. Or they could abandon everything: tanks, trucks, guns, wounded men, and nearly 170 American prisoners, and escape on foot through the darkness. He chose survival. In the early hours of December 24th, 800 German soldiers slipped into the forest, carrying only what their arms could bear. Behind them, the armored core of the spearhead, King Tiger's Panthers, half-tracks stood intact, but lifeless monuments to German logistics failure. When daylight returned, Belgian civilians found them exactly where they had been left. Their engines silent, their barrels loaded, their fuel tanks empty. In the greater sweep of the Battle of the Bulge, this moment was both symbolic and decisive. Courage had not failed. Tactics had not collapsed. It was logistics, simple, unforgiving logistics, that ended the offensive in the snow outside Stowmont. When the guns finally quieted around Stowmont, the American perspective on the Battle of the Bulge shifted from immediate survival to sober analysis. Reports began to flow in after-action notes, field interviews, intelligence summaries, and together they revealed a picture far more revealing than any battlefield map. The story of the Ardennes offensive was not only one of terrain and timing, but of two nations building war in fundamentally different ways. Major Hal McCown's debriefing was among the first to reach higher headquarters. Having observed Kampfgruppe Peiper from inside its collapsing perimeter, he provided an unfiltered look at a force fighting with skill but starved of essentials. He described tanks without fuel wounded, without medicine soldiers wearing American winter gear, scavenged from overrun depots. His conclusion was simple, but carried the weight of lived combat. Germany had not lost because its men were untrained or uncommitted. It had lost because its supply system had broken beneath them. This echoed what senior American commanders already suspected. Their own supply network, stretching from East Coast ports to the foxholes of the Ardennes, had grown into a logistical organism unmatched in modern warfare. Standardized trucks, interchangeable parts, airdropped supplies, millions of K-rations shipped across an ocean and delivered to the front with mathematical precision. At that, so, the strength of American military logistics had become undeniable, visible, even to captured German officers who opened those boxes and saw what their own factories could no longer produce. After the war, the German High Command corroborated this from the other side of the table. General Asso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, openly admitted that the Ardennes offensive had been doomed from the start. The fuel allocations were insufficient. The plan depended on capturing American depots, an assumption he called a gamble disguised as strategy. He explained that by late 1944, German logistics failure was not a temporary setback, but a structural collapse, bombed rail lines, crippled industry horse-drawn wagons trying to support mechanized units. Meanwhile, other German leaders hid behind excuses, weather, terrain, or the unpredictability of battle. But the American analysts saw the truth clearly. The Battle of the Bulge had become a case study in the primacy of logistics. When a modern army loses its supply chain, it loses its ability to fight, no matter how fierce its soldiers or how advanced its tanks. And that insight would shape military doctrine for decades, an enduring reminder that wars are not only won at the front, but by the long, tireless system that feeds it. When historians look back at the winter of 1942, they often see a landscape shaped by tanks, artillery, and men fighting through snow and smoke. But sometimes the clearest truths come in smaller forms. In the Battle of the Bulge, one of those truths fit inside a brown cardboard box. For the German officers who opened K-rations during the Ardennes offensive, the discovery was not simply a matter of taste or comfort. It was a quick revelation of what modern war had become, a contest not only of courage, but of capacity. That little box carried the weight of factories thousands of miles away, of ocean convoys, of highways and depots, and the immense pulsing system we now call American military logistics. Every neatly packed meal reflected an industrial power that had already outpaced Germany's ability to fight. And for Kampfgruppe Peiper, whose final tanks froze empty in the forests near Stoumont, the contrast could not have been sharper. Their defeat was not sealed by a single battle or a single mistake, but by a larger reality, one forged in steel mills, refineries, shipyards, and assembly lines. What emerged from the snowbound Ardennes was a lasting lesson. Tactics may win battles, but logistics wins wars. The bravery of soldiers matters. The skill of commanders matters. But without fuel, without food, without a way to sustain momentum, even the most determined army becomes a shadow of itself. The German logistics failure of late 1944 was not an isolated breakdown. It was the end of a system pushed beyond its limits, trying to match an opponent whose resources were simply larger, safer, and more adaptable. For Americans reflecting on this chapter of history, the meaning runs deeper than victory alone. It reminds us that the strength of a nation lies not only in its weapons, but in its ability to support the men and women who carry them. It is a story of industry organization and the quiet efficiency that makes everything else possible. So as you think about this moment, one ration box opened in the cold, consider what it truly revealed about the Battle of the Bulge and about the world that followed. What do you believe was the real turning point of the Ardennes offensive? A tactical decision, a missed opportunity, or the overwhelming force of logistics itself. If you value the lessons history leaves behind and want to continue exploring the moments that shaped our modern world, feel free to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting in the shadows of the past.